All right, so today on the program, I've got Glanis Changachirere. I hate doing this, but I would want you to introduce yourself, just maybe giving us a shot about who she is, what she's doing, where she's coming from, and everything that makes a community champion. Glanis, welcome to Meet the Press with Lovejoy. Feel free. This is your program. Yeah, meeting the press. Feel free to say anything.
Well, thank you for having me, Lovejoy. The questions are just too many, but I hope I will be able to respond to all the questions that you've said, because I think you've asked for quite a couple of things. But for starters, well, I'm Glanis Changachirere, as in Muzare, Glanis Changachirere. I was born and raised by peasant farmers in Mashonaland Central Province, in particular Mazoe district. That's where I did my primary education as well as my secondary education. And then from there, I moved to Mpakose High 1, where I did my high school. And then I went back to my province of origin, Mashonaland Central Province, where I did my first undergraduate degree. Actually, my undergraduate degree in business studies, specializing in marketing. And then, of course, after that, a couple of years later, I studied public policy and governance with the Africa University in Mutare. And then in 2018 to 19, I went to the UK, where I did my Master of Arts in International Relations, focusing on gender at the University of Birmingham. So, yeah, in the short and long of it, in terms of basically my background, that's who I am. But, you know, in terms of probably what you're looking for me, I would not call myself a community champion, honestly. I'm just that ordinary, you know, woman who is living her life.
And I see you're trying to be humble here.
No, that's exactly how it comes out. You know, it's like, it's very natural for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm living my life, and I express the things I like, you know, in the public, and I express the things I also don't like. And where I feel that, you know, there's an injustice happening, I fight it. You know, I don't take things as they are given. So I tend to fight back where I can. When I was growing up, you know, I grew up in a very humble background where, you know, like I said, my parents are peasant farmers. Even up to now, they're peasant farmers in Mashonaland Central Bay. So we didn't really have enough resources for them, you know, to consider education to the highest levels as something really, you know, worth it for them. So I think that's when I started to pick the friction between me and my family. Because now when I thought, you know, I need to proceed with my education, they were saying, well, we don't have resources, we don't have, you know, the funds to take you to school. And me, I'm like, why not? You know, I need to go to high school, I need to go to secondary school, I need to have a degree. But because they knew they could not afford, and also because, you know, we had grown up in a context where education was not promoted that much in rural areas, they were adamant. There are no funds, Glanis, and that's it. So for me, I think this is when I started that's when my activism started coming out that much. It was just after I completed my grade 7 and I wanted to go to secondary school. And so from my exchanges with them, I ended up just fighting back. And I think from that, what I got was that when you can't get what you want, you know, or where you can't get what you are entitled to, especially your rights, you need to be able to speak out, you need to be able to take action, so that you eventually get what you deserve. So that's basically how my activism has started. And I think over time I managed to then, because I believed that myself, I was able to stand up, but others were not able to stand up. So I believed that there were also other girls like me out there who needed somebody to speak out on their behalf, and hence I started the Institute for Young Women Development. And of course, my motivation for the institute was not only because of that personal experience I had in my own family, but you see how much I fought to be in school, to remain in school. and I even fought the same to be able to get into university. But when I was in university now, the government scrapped, the grants system, and they introduced fees. And here I was, a second-year student who was recruited under a grant system coming from a very poor family, without notice, without warrant. I just felt that was very unfair. They needed to give us time, and they also needed to set up mechanisms as a government. And so when I started fighting back against that, of course, being a member of the Student Representative Council then, I suffered at the hands of the state, where I was arrested several times. By the time I completed my university, I was actually commuting because I was chucked out of university. So having experienced all that, from a young age in the family to university and the state repression, I think for me, I just realized that yes, we are human beings, but perhaps our life is also centered around us being able to fight the things that we are experiencing that we don't like, the things that are actually oppressing us, so that's really my life, and I think that's my journey. Yeah.
It looks like it's been quite a tumultuous journey. It's not all rosy. I think when people look at you right now, don't know some of the things that you're saying today. And we at 26 Richard, we applaud you for championing yourself, for bringing yourself to this level. And we hope you're inspiring someone to come out and be like you, or even better. You mentioned something about IWID. I know I have worked with you on IWID, but for the benefit of the rest of people who are watching right now, what is IWID? I know you talked about how you came about it, but what exactly is it, and what are you trying to achieve with IWID?
So IWID, the Institute for Young Women Development, is it's a feminist organization that promotes the participation of young women, in decision making and politics. And the way we do it is we do capacity development of young women, train them on various issues, on human rights, on governance, economic empowerment, a lot of things really, on the Constitution of Zimbabwe, a lot of things we train them. And in addition, beyond the training, we do try to really create practical platforms for the young women to start, exercising their own agency, and start to contribute towards decision making. So we have various programs that guide our work, and out of the different programs, I will just mention the 4, guiding thematic areas that we work with, and then I'll unpack what those seek to achieve and how we are doing it. So we've got a thematic area that focuses strengthening feminist leadership, and we have got another one that focuses on strengthening young women's participation in politics, in particular, in decision making. And then the third one focuses on economic empowerment and sustainable livelihoods. And then the fourth one focuses on well-being and environmental care. So with the first one on feminist leadership, the entry point is really our lives. Like I have said, for me, what I experienced, especially in the family, was because I was a girl child. So there are certain things that we face just because we are of our gender, because we're girls. So one of the things we really try to encourage, to educate young women, is for them to be able to see the injustices that happen around them, because of their gender, so that when they see that, then they start challenging that. They need to be able to educate communities on the equality of the girl child. They need to be able to also stand up and exercise their full potential, so that they can really be who they want to be, so that they can really, follow their dreams and achieve what they want to achieve in life. And when they achieve it, they need to be able to continuously encourage ideas of society seeing girls and boys as equal, because they are just children, and they're all human beings. So that's what the feminist leadership is about. And when we then bring that feminist leadership component into our participation in decision making and politics theme, we then try to encourage, young women, when they get into decision making positions, to be able to champion issues that affect young women and women in their communities, so that these people are not continuously, left out in what would be happening in their communities, be it development programs, be it democratic programs, be the economic empowerment issues. So that brings me to then start talking about the thematic area on participation and in decision making and politics. So within this focus program, we actually, train on various aspects, including how to become a leader, what are the things that are expected of you when you're a leader, how do you become a leader who champions things that people actually want, being responsive, and in addition, of course, encouraging them to get into politics. I think for starters, that's one of the things that is very key, because for them to then exercise the leadership, they need to be in a certain position. And when we're talking about politics, we're looking at the politics both at the local level and at the national level. And at the local, this starts with young women actually being useful leaders in their communities, joining school development committees, ward development committees, clinic committees, and being able to champion issues that affect young women and women. And so over time, we've actually seen a lot of young women, I think close to 500 young women, being elected into those different development committees at a local level, in various districts across the country. And at a much higher level now, this is when we support them, again, by training and exposure, so that they're able to get into local government level politics, where they campaign as councillors and at a national level as parliamentarians. So under that thematic area, we've got a flagship program called the hashtag Vote Run Lead, which basically encourages young women to register to vote, be able to go and vote on the actual day, and to run for office. Don't just vote, but also contest, for political power and vote for other women. And when they get into office, we then encourage them to provide that feminist leadership that I was talking about. So these things are very much, interlinked, and you can't really separate. So we just use the separations for the purposes of, programming and being able to remain focused. And I'm happy to say in 2018, under the Vote Run Lead, we did have young women who actually managed to run for office, that we trained in feminist leadership. We supported mentorship and coaching, from the current female politicians and those who've been in politics before and have actually held political office, and they managed to get elected. And when they were elected, we then continued to also support with talking points, to say how do you formulate talking points on various issues, so that they are able to continuously bring the very issues from their communities into parliament, and to debate issues from various communities, in ways that really benefit the people on the ground, rather than benefiting themselves as leaders. So that's the kind of support. So we continue to work with the women as they are in leadership. And the third focus area around economic empowerment, we really promote, women to also get into businesses. So training as well in terms of business skills, financial skills, and linking them with capital. I'm excited to say at the present moment we're actually, facilitating that the young women have, knowledge about the Women's Bank, and also, to see how capital from such kind of institutions is independence is very, very important. Be they in leadership or not, you cannot talk of feminine leadership without talking of empowering a woman economically, because I think in the society we live in, patriarchy, which is the system that makes women less than men, it actually thrives on the basis that when women are dependent on their male counterparts, husbands, fathers, brothers, etc., for financial support, it's difficult for them to be independently, to then make certain decisions, because they say he who pays the piper plays the tune. So economic empowerment is really, really central at the center of the work that we do in terms of feminist leadership. And then lastly, well-being and environmental care. Women suffer from a burden of unpaid care work. We do all the work that needs to be done in the home. And for Glanis, even if she has to go to work where she's a director and lead, a wide team of employees, she's still expected to play, those roles of unpaid, gender work. So it's very important for women to be able to actually take care of themselves, to prioritize that. Look, I'm not a machine, I'm a human being, and I need to be able to take care of myself so that I can continue to be able to do the things that I'm doing. So we really encourage physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And above all, we believe that we cannot be healthy, at a physical, mental, and spiritual level without a healthy environment. So we really encouraging women to take care of the environment. In mining, handle their communities. If they explore and destroy vegetation and whatnot, they need to be held accountable to actually do reforestation, so that the communities can continue to thrive and we are able to protect those communities for future generations. So that's really the work that we've been doing, and I'm actually happy to say, as I'm having this conversation with you, Lovejoy, I no longer am in the forefront of that work. In terms of the one being, and the young women we've worked with over the years we've created is the one that is actually doing this work without us. So they self-organize, they self-mobilize, they identify issues in their communities, they link up with the different leaders who are in their communities and push, for various issues. So that's what the Institute is about, and the work that it's been able to do over the years.
Interesting. That's quite a very interesting journey there that you and the team are doing. I'm privileged to have worked with you guys, and I think I know some of the things that you're talking about. And I, having seen you, coming from one point and now you're somewhere, I think this is what makes you and the team community champions, and we say well done to that. Okay, so Glanis, moving on, would also want to know, in your experiences, you're talking about working with young women, and it predominantly works with mainly rural young women, right?
Yes.
What are some of the challenges that you have faced, especially working in the mining area of Bindura, where you are probably based? What are some of the challenges that you have faced in as far as trying to empower the young women in particular?
So there are lots of challenges, like really multifaceted challenges. But I think, for starters, it's the issue of accessing the women themselves. Because remember, we're working with young women between the ages of 15 to 35. Some are still under the custody of their parents. Some are actually, young wives. Some are, single women who are, living with their families and so forth. Economy, once you're 18 and above, it doesn't exist. Because for one to then get a small piece, it's something huge. There are lots. So young women in rural areas may not necessarily have the same privileges that young women in urban areas can have, where they can easily go and rent a place and stay on their own. So the issue of access, therefore, becomes of paramount importance. It's difficult to mobilize the young women and get them out of their homes to come to gatherings and convenings by the Institute and any other organization. So there are lots of hurdles where they need to face seeking permission, and for the young women who are mothers, you've sought permission but you've got kids, and the husbands will tell you. So we have to also plan for our programs with the children in mind, and then level then become and even issues around confidence as well, you know. They themselves, because they're not used to doing these things, it's not easy for them when you call for a training workshop to say, come, let's talk about issues of our participation, decision making platform, even in the home. So the issues of confidence as well, they also affect, the rate at which the women come out to be part and parcel of our movement and our programs. And then outside the home is the issue of community leadership. Like our communities in rural areas, they are really like full of gatekeepers. So it starts with traditional leaders, and then there are elected officials, and broadly, the political leadership or political elites in themselves. They are quite factor when it comes to being able to access women and actually do, especially the work that we do as a non-profit organization in the communities. So that's a lot because, again, we live in a very politically sensitive, country where you invest so much in trying to really explain yourself so that you are considered not engaging in activities that are detrimental to the communities politically. So that is a big obstacle. And of course, I'll talk about how we've managed to overcome that as an organization.
Maybe before you go there, before you talk about how you've managed that, I would want to know how that makes you feel in the that you are trying to put, and also given your background.
So for me, I think back then it was very frustrating because it's the same oppression that I've experienced. So now when I'm doing things that are within my rights, because Institute for Young Women Development is a registered organization by Zimbabwean laws, and when you're trying to do work that advances government programs, because they've signed up to different instruments that promote the equality of women and women empowerment, and then you are blocked by some people, obviously the first instinct is you get frustrated. But I think over time I've learned to then internalize the fact that there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens in our communities. So now when I do the work, I actually do it in ways where I acknowledge that reality and already go with a clear mindset and clear plans that fits within that reality. Because there's no way you can do a program in communities without talking to a traditional leader.
Yeah,
so we better familiarize. If we really want to improve, the lives of the women in those communities, then we have to be prepared to go through the traditional leaders, but also to make sure women are vulnerable. So which means we have to find ways of working with those traditional leaders, because we can go there as a non-profit organization, we do our work, we live, but because we would have rubbed shoulders with traditional leaders or other community leaders and not live things in the same way they were, it puts those very women at risk. So we definitely have to find ways of working with the women. So I think now when I think about those obstacles, yes, I still get frustrated, but I think we are now much more prepared and we know how best to handle it. So it sees much of a serious challenge. But definitely would love to see communities that are quite receptive of those communities, or that develop those communities, or community leaders who are the women need, than vice versa.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I understand the political dynamics,
Right.
the political cultural dynamics of trying to get hold of a chief, and maybe the political leadership there. You
Right.
get there and they tell you the other thing, and you want to do your stuff, but moving on. In your view, what does advocating for gender equality and women's rights mean to you, and why is it so important?
What does it mean? Like I said, living my life, okay? So it's living your life. Because ultimately, gender equality and women's rights is about women living their lives the way they want, or women thriving in life just like any other person. Yeah, I think for me that's what it's about. So when I'm looking at the work that I do in the context of gender equality, equality and women's rights, I am not looking at like what society does, where they say no, this is about home wrecking, and it's not that. It's actually about strengthening the women, so happy women in your homes or happy girls in your homes, because they they feel that they belong to the family, they belong to the country, and they are not second class citizens. For me, that's what it's about. In the workplace, this is about women actually being accorded the same opportunities as the men. When you're going for an interview, it doesn't have to be about how you look, how you dress, and stuff like that. You're going in a job interview just because you want that job and you know you're capable. So women don't need to be discriminated on the basis of their gender in the workplace. And once they are there, they need the opportunities to express themselves, to influence how things are done in the workplace. And even in politics, women are the same. Women parliamentarians are the same as male parliamentarians. Women councillors are the same as female councillors. As the male councillors. So they just need to be respected as full citizens, contributing meaningful ideas to the development country, and being accorded that space to do that without being prejudged. I think for me, that's what women's rights is about. If I go into a bank and I need a loan, I don't need to be asked if I'm married or not. I need to be asked about my business idea, how convincing it is. And similarly, when the banks are giving the money, they also need to look at how the past has affected the women, so that if there are certain things that they need for me, for example, the issue of collateral security, we're in a context where it's still gender unequal. And yes, we are doing this work, but when there are opportunities, for example, banks wants to give loans, they need to understand that most of the women are not able to be where the men are because we are not yet there. So they need to be provided with capital that actually accords them or gives them that ability to be able to transition to then be where the men are, and then we can, in terms of collateral security and financial inclusion. So it's really about women being able to thrive in life.
Okay, let's talk about the issue of and inclusion. I know the United Nations is talking about leaving no one behind.
Right.
Agenda 2030 back home as well. We're talking about Vision 2030, etc., etc. Over time, we have seen an increased participation of men. Do you think there is a better understanding of gender equality by men now as back then, and what do you attribute that to?
By men or by women?
Because back then, let's talk about back then, gender equality was sort of viewed as if it's something to only do with women or just women, and men would just sit back, right? And now you've got probably men like me who are working with women, right? But back then it was difficult. So do you think maybe enough is being done to at least rope in men and include them?
A lot of work, I think, is actually being done to make sure that men appreciate the discourse of gender.
It's like propaganda.
in the positive light, light. Because in the past, what we actually used to see, it's still happening now, but you're also talking about, the variations we are seeing, right, as these things are happening. What we used to see back then is men play and making sure that women are discriminated. That was very clear, which is why even at a family level, where there's a family meeting, for starters, we're talking about the boys, the fathers. But now, I think with the work that's being around gender equality and talking so much about women's rights, I think the men are now gradually looking at the concept of women from a positive perspective, where they try to include the women. So now I think in the homes, in my family now, ndinogara udare nemusha. Panenge ndavharidzirwa, I try to get in, and I'm not violently, removed like probably what it used to be.
You're just
like
simply
in the
asking for a
past.
space.
Exactly. So I think there's a lot of work that's being done, moving with ideas of, men as partners, male inclusion, in her shoes. Yeah, so men are beginning to be accommodative of the idea of women. But I think what we still need to do more of is how the men can actually unlearn the many negative things that men, so that the talk becomes action. Because right now I think what we see the most, or there's a disparity, there's a disconnect between what the men will say and what they will do. So you have Lovejoy, who can say, I'm a feminist, and Lovejoy has a partner at home, or a wife at home, both of you get home like literally tired, and Lovejoy will still take his phone. Now it's no longer newspapers. You take your iPhone and you're going on Instagram and Twitter, and your wife is in the kitchen, but she's as tired. What we need to do, or more of what the women or the feminist movement need to do, is to continuously, conscientize the men to be able to unlearn the things they've internalized and start acting towards gender equality and the realization of women's rights.
And talking about that sort of inclusion, do you think Zimbabwean policies or maybe laws or something like that allows for men to really play that active role, or maybe it's just organizations, various other organizations that are coming in and filling that gap that the government should be playing?
I think the laws and the policies do provide for the framework for men to play in the advancement of women's rights. But I think where we are lacking is where the government itself is not able to drive its own policies. Because remember, they're the policy implementers.
Yes.
So they come up with these policies. We have got the 2013 Constitution. When you go to Section 56, it talks about gender equality and non-discrimination. It talks about how women need to be included in all spheres of life, socially, economically, politically, yeah? And you go to Section 80, it expands the rights of women to even talk about the women have the right to choose and decide when to get married, they should not be forced into marriages, and all those things, right? But the government, on the part of making sure that the men in the country comply with those, frameworks, I think for me that's where we are lacking. The government doesn't have enough mechanisms, and even at a legal level, I think the government is not doing enough to make sure that the men play an active role in advancing the very rights that we have in some of our policies and in some of our laws. And in addition, the government is also backtracking on its own laws. So this issue about if a woman cheats,
Oh yes.
then lobola should be paid back, should be given back to the husband. This is against the very notion of women have got these rights, they are full citizens who need to be held accountable of their own actions. This has nothing to do with the Rora, because Rora is between the families. This is part of our African tradition to say if Glanis is going to be married in this family, the families vari kusunga ukama through Rora. Arineina Glanis wacho. I'm not being sold. It's about kusunga ukama. So when you then take mombe za magambo bawabereki wa Glanis, just because Glanis has done what you're not agreeing with, what are you saying about this entire, relationship between the families? And in addition, what are you saying about the idea of cheating? Are we now saying women must never cheat, but men must cheat because they have an open check? No one is paying Rora for the men, so it's really the government and our courts kind of like not doing enough to enforce the policies that we have, but also even backtracking, which is something that's very, very, very worrisome, because it's really eroding the very gains, that
we
right.
try to fight for.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Would want to wrap up this, but let's also talk about the issue of child marriages. I can't go anywhere without really talking about it. You are working in a mining community, so to say. How prevalent is this? How prevalent are child marriages in some of your work that you're doing? How often do you come up with these, and how do you think we can we
very phenomenon in rural farm, anything outside the capital cities. Marriages during this COVID-19 period, and even teen in Central Province alone, it claims I think plus. So it's on number one, and this is where we're headquartered. And of course the other, provinces as well, that are outside the capital city and the major metropolitan city Bulawayo. So the trend really, you can connect it to those kind of communities. And I think the challenge for me is really within the very things that we talked about earlier, Lovejoy. Get men involved in women's rights and gender equality, but we're not doing enough in terms of stopping men to perpetuate actions against where these child marriages happen. Well, for starters, girls get pregnant really around the gender dynamics and how these things play out. But let's assume a child gets pregnant. She's 13, and the father discovers, or the family discovers. You know what they do? They go where you got that pregnancy. So you're chasing away a 13-year-old with a pregnancy that they don't even understand, that they don't even take care of, to go and stay with the very man who has abused them, because this is literally abuse. How do you have sex with a 13-year-old girl? So what you're seeing here is a practice in a home setup that is against the very women's rights that the men are talking about. Number two, some are voluntarily marrying off their girls. We see that happening in districts like Muzarabani, in Birede. Recently we were in Centenary, where we're doing a child rights assessment, and the stories of how families literally take their girls from school and marry them to older men in the communities, are very scary. So, but for these fathers, what they are seeing is not a girl, a minor. They are seeing property. They are seeing an economic asset. I can take my child from home, give him to this man, and this man can be maize in exchange, can be cattle, those things. So I think for me, what we are seeing of child marriage does not need us to really focus on the effects. We need to go down to the root causes, and the root causes are the very practices that I'm talking about, the very cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, because we are never penned in these conservative apostolic churches. By the way, that's Drimadsmai, and I see these things happen. It's the beliefs we have internalized, and guess what? The beliefs have nothing to do with one's faith or one's spiritual life, but we instrumentalize what we believe, what we think, and say the church religion says children, you should get men from the church who should marry your girls before blah blah blah, and then we give off our girls. So I think we need to go to the root causes. Make sure the men unlearn, society unlearns. Let's remove all that we've learnt in the past and start seeing our girls in the positive light.
But then I think the other question would be, how do you make men unlearn something that they taught probably for years and years?
How old are you now?
Well, I'm old enough. I'm 28 now.
Let's say you're 25, and we're trying to get you to unlearn the things you've learned over the past 25 years. I know it's not easy, but it needs the recognition. Knowing Lovejoy, I need to start viewing women differently. And as you do it differently, then honestly influence the people within your inner circle. That's why I told you, Kuti, for me, when I look at the institute, I look at women's rights work, it's about really me living my life. Because in my family, I don't stop talking about the family not having to marry any of my nieces when they are below the age of 18.
Yes.
And when I'm with, I'm telling them that they need to be able to dream and pursue their dreams. So I think for me, that's what needs to happen. Beyond us being able to influence our inner circles, this is where the issue comes in, the issue of law that you were talking about. If we have laws that outlaws child marriages, why are we not enforcing? Why are families still in Muzarabani, where we've got police stations, still marrying off girls? Why can we not track? Why are we not arresting the perpetrators? Why are we leaving the fathers and the mothers, accomplices, in chasing away a 13-year-old pregnant, sending them off to a man? Why are we leaving them scot-free? So I think for me, it needs a multi-pronged approach, where as families we play our role, but the state needs to come in heavily to make sure that laws and policies are enforced. And where we have gaps in our laws, because we still have a serious crisis with the issue of sexual consent. This is also, some of the loopholes that the government then finds itself getting confused in, where you allow for consent at a younger age, and when they get pregnant, you're saying they're not supposed to be married because now it's a child marriage, but you've allowed them to get pregnant. So I think for me, there's really need to harmonize the laws as well. Where there are gaps, they need to be plugged in, and there is need for enforcement. The police, the courts, the traditional leaders, they must not stop. Their business should not be preventing NGOs and development, actors getting into communities. It should be about identifying the people who are causing problems and saying, how do we solve this together with the development partners and the NGOs? So I think for me, it really.
Okay. As Iway, do you think we have penetrated enough in terms of let's talk about traditional leaders, to engage them or with them to say, guys, this is what we're trying to do? And how has been their response in as far as trying to empower the girl child and do away with child marriage is concerned?
So again, it's a two-pronged answer. It's a yes and a no. It's a yes in terms of us being able to be consistent or consistently engage certain traditional leaders on the need for them to recognize and respect women and girls' rights. And I'm really, really, really happy with the progress that we are seeing with some of the traditional leaders. I think we have peace committees in different areas that have been absorbed by traditional courts to play paralegal roles, so that they can advise the chiefs on what to do with young women and women's rights. That's a milestone. All the chiefs, I think it's 8 chiefs in Mashonal and Central Province who have taken aboard those paralegal women. And I think in some instances as well in Gurube, I think 2 chiefs in Gurube and another chief in Shamba district, they've actually appointed the women as as official traditional court officers in line with the Constitution, which means the women are not just going to give advice, but they're actually working for the courts, and
they're
so
included.
they get to earn out of the courts as well.
Okay.
Yeah, they're included in the chiefs panels as the chiefs advisors.
Which is something that we grew up knowing as if it's a taboo.
Exactly. I remember at some point I was chased out of a traditional court by a chief while I was wearing a trousers and I was only 12, but I was chased away. But now the girls will say, no. The court has nothing to do with how the girls are dressed. Yeah. So I think there's progress. And that shows that we have penetrated enough and we have made the chiefs realize the importance of promoting women's rights in their courts. But where I then say it's a no, it's because our communities are massive. We are one organization. Of course, there are many other organizations all over, but sometimes you're not using the same approaches. Sometimes you're not using the same methods. Even in our numbers, we can't get to every single village and every single family in those rural areas, in those mining compounds, in those resettlement areas. So I think there's really need to expand in terms of the initiatives, either by IYWD or any other, non-governmental organization that may be working for the promotion of women's rights, so that there are many of us and are able to penetrate widely. And I think for me, this is how we also contribute towards changing the practices, because we are always there, challenging, pushing certain things and making sure things are done, in the manner that respects women's rights.
The program is Meet the Press with Lovejoy, and today we have got Glanis Changachirere. She's the director and founder of the Institute for Young Women Development, and that is working with rural women, mainly rural women, but I think young women.
Young women living in rural areas.
Young women living in rural areas. They're empowering them, and we are glad to have her here today. And as to Sexual we say, let them be. There's a saying which goes, I think it's something that is used by the United Nations and everyone else, girls, not brides. And we encourage to be responsible when it comes to the girl child, because they are the future, and if you destroy their future, then we have got no one to lead us tomorrow. And we can't have another Glanis if you abuse them when they're young. Glanis, we have to wrap up, I know, because of time. I would want to talk about the issue of access to information for the young women living in rural areas in particular. We are just about 2 years away from elections. In 2018, you did a splendid job. You encouraged women to take part in political spaces, and they did. And now we are going into another election. Do you think there is enough room for young women? Do they know that they can do this? Do they have the courage to do this political move?
The courage is certainly there. The will is certainly there. But I think the issue of access to information is a very significant factor that we can't roll out. So for the women to start stepping out and getting to and engaging and participating and getting information about where to register, how to register to vote, inspecting the voters' roll, etc. There are issues centered around access to information. And pre-COVID-19 era, young women and women in rural, these marginalized communities, they have naturally been, marginalized from access to information digitally, because this is where the world is going. It's gone digital, and most young women don't have access to smartphones or even a simple phone. For those who have access, it's access, but they don't own the phones. So probably the phone is owned by the brother, by the husband, by the father, and the young woman or that mother in that house doesn't have a phone of their own where you can send in tailored information around how they can, participate in elections. So it's definitely, I think, been a determining factor in terms of the level of participation eventually. And now we are in a COVID-19 era, which has even made things more complicated and has actually deepened that problem of access to information. And the women are even more closed out than they were before. So it's definitely a big issue. But going into 2023, it means a lot of effort and resources needs to be invested towards making sure that young women and women in rural communities have access to information. And remember, 75% of Zimbabwe's population live in rural areas. And remember, 52% of Zimbabwe's population are women.
The women, yeah.
69% are young people. So when you do the mathematics, you realize we have the bulky of young women and young men who are living in rural areas, and also predominantly women, because they are 52% population. And so when those can't have access to information, it means we have an election, yes, but in terms of freeness and fairness, I don't think that will really be true. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done by the Institute for Young Women Development, and of course all the other various women's rights groups, as well as even mainstream CSOs, to really try to mitigate the information gap, especially for women in marginalized communities, going into 2023.
All right, so as we wrap up, Glanis, I know we talked about everything else, politics, economics, the work that you're doing, but would want to know, because it's always good to end on a positive, what would want to know your hallmark, what we can call the hallmark, the success stories that you say, no, we've done this. I know you talked about the chiefs, that included. Do you maybe have one more for us that you can say, yes, this is something that we did and it received or it got a lot of recognition?
There are many things that we've done that have gotten lots of recognition. But I think the one that's close to my heart, of course I'll be selective because this is what matters to me and what I envision in the future. It's being able to reach out to women and mobilize thousands of young women who are now very conscious of what it means to be a woman and what they need to see that woman doing. So we have a lot of women who have contested for office, women who have registered to vote and have participated in elections, women who are running businesses, and women who are taking care of themselves, health, general outlook. When you go to rural areas, you've seen the women. They don't look like they live in a village.
Yeah, I know.
You think they're coming. So I think for me, being able to demystify these very negative things around what a woman in a rural area should look like, and actually getting the women to exercise. When you have them in a podium and they're talking to a councillor or a parliamentarian, it looks like it's vice versa, asking very critical questions, demanding specific things. I think for me, it's really the hallmark, because they usually say, Anzi, I believe no one is. They have the voice, but there are lots of factors that prevent that voice from being speaking out and having that voice being requested. And I think above all, it's how the IWD movement has grown beyond staff. It's grown beyond IYW, about Glanis herself. So when you go into some village and you see women are gathered and they're talking about the need for women inclusion in devolution, the need for people to respect the rights of women living with disabilities, the need for women to be included in economic interventions happening in their communities, without us them to do that, I think for me, that's been the hallmark. Because I know that I'm not dispensable. The organization is not dispensable. We're not going to be there forever.
Yeah.
But the education that we are living will certainly outlive us and our generation. So I think for me, that's really the hallmark. Yeah.
So IWID is raising an empowered young woman.
Yeah.
Proud of the work that you're doing, Glanis and IWID, and we consider you. I know you refuse this, but we consider you a community champion because of the work that you're doing. It's not every day that you get people, dedicating that to be with rural women, to be sacrificing their time their families, their family time. You should be doing something, but you are there, and we are proud of you and the organization. That said, thank you so much for coming to the program. We hope to be tracking some of the work that you're doing, and we'll showcase it to everybody else out there. But for now, stay safe. Are you vaccinated?
I am fully vaccinated. Received my second dose, so I'm fully vaccinated.
How do you feel?
I feel good. I really feel so good about it, because myself as a model for vaccination, because there are lots of things that people are being told, and it's not true. Look, I'm alive. I don't even look sick, but I was vaccinated. I got my 2 full doses. So yeah, definitely people need to take care of themselves. They need to get vaccinated, stay safe, and stay well.
And that's the message. Stay safe and stay well. And from 263, we always encourage people to be vaccinated, to stay safe, and be our brothers keepers, so that we see the end of this together. That said, thank you so much, Glanis, for your time. My name is Lovejoy, and join me in other programs to follow.
Thank you very much.
For these and other stories, visit our website www.263chat.com. Follow us on Twitter @263chat and like our Facebook page 263chat.